Hey guys, a new story has been sent in by Mike from America. He went to a trip to the Philippines and had a horrible experience. Let's jump into the story. My name is Mike. I'm 42 years old, born and raised in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. Life for me was never particularly flashy, but it was honest work that kept me going. I've worked in construction most of my life, swinging hammers and pouring sweat under the hot sun. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the feeling of seeing a project come together from the ground up. By the time I hit my late 30s, I'd climbed my way up to foreman. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to live on, pay the bills, and grab a beer at O'Malley's pub on Friday nights with the guys. Life was steady, predictable, until that day 3 years ago. It was a cold February morning, the kind where the air bites at your face. We were working on a commercial building downtown. I remember that day clearly, not because I knew what would happen, but because it was just like any other. I was up on the third floor securing beams when the platform beneath me shifted. Before I could react, I felt weightless. A sudden drop. The wind rushed past me and then the sickening thud as I hit the ground. When I woke up in the hospital, they told me I'd fractured my spine and shattered my left leg. It was months of surgeries, physical therapy, and the endless whirl of insurance claims. Then the dust finally settled. I was awarded over $150,000 in a court settlement. For a guy like me, it was a windfall, enough to pay off my debts and start fresh. But looking back now, I wish I'd known that the real cost of that fall was much higher. After a year of limping around the house, boredom started gnawing at me. My brother Matt would swing by sometimes with his kids, and my own brother Jim would call. But it wasn't enough to shake off the loneliness. So when an old buddy of mine, Tom, who I hadn't seen in years, suggested a trip to Thailand to live a little, it didn't take much convincing. I was in. We landed in Manila late at night. The city was a neon jungle, chaotic and alive. It was nothing like I'd ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of street food and motorbike exhaust. Tom, who'd been here before, led the way through the bustling crowds. Within hours, we were sipping Red Horse beers at a bar in Makati, surrounded by music that made my head throb and faces I couldn't forget. That's where I met her, Lan. She said her name was. She had a smile that could disarm a man and eyes that sparkle like the city's lights. She was beautiful in a way that made me forget the years and the scars. We talked, laughed, and shared drinks until the hours melted into each other. It felt like the first time in years that I was truly alive. Lan worked at the bar, and though I knew the stories about bar girls and their real motives, I convinced myself that she was different. She told me about her family, a sick mother back in the village, a younger brother who needed school fees, and the struggles she faced to send money home. I fell for every word, hook, line, and sinker. Soon I was spending every night with Lan. I paid for dinners, gifts, and family emergencies that seemed to come up more frequently. The more I invested, the deeper I felt entangled. Lan had a way of making me feel needed and important, something I hadn't felt in years. One day, Lan took me to meet her family in her village, a few hours outside of Manila. The ride there was bumpy and dusty, but I didn't mind. I was eager to see the people she spoke so fondly of. When we arrived, her mother, Pa, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her younger brother, Ryan, barely acknowledged me. The village was small, houses made of corrugated metal and wood, chickens pecking around the dirt, and old men playing checkers under the shade of a tree. The visit started innocently enough. Pa prepared a modest meal of rice and vegetables, and Lan translated their conversation for me. They thanked me for taking care of Lan and expressed their struggles. But as the days passed, things began to shift. Pa started mentioning medical bills that needed paying. Ryan spoke about his school, needing fees for a special program, and Lan would look at me with those pleading eyes, and I'd fold every time. Before I knew it, I was wiring money to Lan's family on a regular basis. First it was for Pa's medication. I was told it was life-saving. Then Ryan needed a new uniform and books for school. The requests kept coming, subtly at first, but soon they became more brazen. Lan began to talk about opening a small business for her mother to keep her occupied. I'd convinced myself it was all out of love and generosity. Tom tried to warn me. He said he'd seen it happen before. "Mike, these girls are pros," he'd say, shaking his head over a whiskey at the bar. "They know how to play on a guy's emotions." But I didn't listen. Lan wasn't just a bar girl. She was my Lan. And I was sure that what we had was real. The tipping point came one afternoon when I received a frantic call from Lan. Her voice was shaking, and she said that Ryan had been in an accident, a motorbike crash. She needed money for the hospital bill immediately. I didn't even think twice. I wired over $10,000 that same day. The next week there was another call, this time saying Ryan needed surgery. I was already down to my last $20,000, but I transferred $15,000 without hesitation. Months passed and the money continued to drain. I started to get calls not just from Lan, but from Pa herself, each time with a new crisis. The accidents, medical needs, and school fees became more frequent. Pa's voice turned demanding. Ryan's request for tuition became less shy, and Lan seemed to always have a new story. My suspicions finally started to bubble up when Tom told me he'd heard similar stories from other guys he knew who got tangled up with bar girls. One evening I decided to surprise Lan at her place unannounced. When I got there, I found her laughing and drinking with a group of friends. Not a worry in the world. There was no sign of the stress she had so often shared with me. And when she saw me, her smile faltered for a moment before she put on her usual act. "Mike, I didn't know you were coming," she said, her eyes darting nervously. "Yeah, I thought I'd check in," I said, my voice tight. Over the next few days, things unraveled quickly. I hired a local friend, Tan, to look into Lan's background. He came back with news that hit me like a punch to the gut. Lan's ailing mother was not sick at all. She was known around the village for her gambling habit. Ryan wasn't a struggling student. He hadn't been to school in years and spent most of his time at internet cafes playing video games. The accident had never happened. The stories were a carefully crafted scam. I felt like a fool. But it wasn't just the money. It was the trust, the belief that I mattered to someone again. When I confronted Lan, she cried, begged, and told me that she loved me. But the truth was written all over her face. I packed up my things and left, broken and nearly penniless. When I returned to Cincinnati, I was a shadow of the man who had left. My brothers noticed immediately. Matt tried to pull me out of my slump, taking me to football games and barbecues, while Jim would show up with beers and stories to distract me. But the shame lingered, the knowledge that I'd let myself fall for a lie. I had been to the Philippines looking for excitement, for something new. Instead, I had returned with the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. I wasn't the same person anymore. The man who had once taken pride in his work, his family, and the simple pleasures of life had been replaced by someone who felt empty. The loneliness that had once only been in the background of my life was now the main player. My brothers, though supportive, didn't know how to reach me. No matter how many games or beers we shared, I remained distant, disconnected. It was Tom who finally opened my eyes. We had been out one night, grabbing a few drinks at a local bar. The kind of place where the noise from the streets outside mixed with the clink of glass and the low hum of a crowd. It was the usual. Tom and me catching up with the faint buzz of alcohol making everything. As I reflect on my time in the Philippines, it's hard to ignore the complex and often painful lens through which I view the women I met there. When I first arrived, I was taken by the beauty and grace of many of the women, particularly in the bars, where I spent most of my time. There was something magnetic about them, an allure that was both captivating and, in hindsight, manipulative. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was just another guy visiting, looking for some excitement, for a break from the monotony of life in the States. But the more time I spent there, the more I started to see a pattern. These women who seemed so friendly, warm, and genuinely interested in me were playing a role. Whether it was to make a man feel special, to charm him into thinking he was the one, or to sell him a story that tugged at his heartstrings, they knew exactly what they were doing. I can't help but think of Lan. She was the first one who truly made me feel like I mattered, and I fell for it hard. She was beautiful, kind, and always seemed to be looking out for me. In my mind, I was helping her, being her protector, her hero. She told me about her family, about her struggles, and about the dream she had of a life which was better. I believed in her. I believed that she was someone who needed me. And in some sick way, I needed to believe it. But as I learned the hard way, it was all a lie. Lon, like many others, was playing a part in a larger system that profited from men like me. I'm not saying every woman I met there had the same motivations, but in the bars, the tourist spots, and in the world that existed outside of the glimmering tourist attractions, it felt like a transaction, more than a genuine connection. Love was just another commodity for sale. What's harder to digest is how I still find myself sympathetic to them, even after everything. These women weren't born into this life. They weren't raised to see themselves as objects to be sold and bought. But circumstances, poverty, lack of opportunity, and sometimes desperation pushed them into it. Many were just trying to survive, to take care of their families, and to claw their way out of poverty. And I, naive as I was, fell for the act, mistaking survival for affection. I don't know what it says about me or them, but I do know that I left the Philippines with a bitter taste in my mouth. I came looking for adventure and excitement, thinking that I could connect with someone in a way I hadn't before. Instead, I walked away with the realization that I'd been taken for a fool. And it wasn't just the money that hurt, it was the emotional toll. It made me question everything I thought I knew about relationships and about myself. Do I blame the women? In some ways, yes, for deceiving me. But in other ways, I don't know. What I saw as deception, they saw as survival. It's hard to look at the situation without some understanding. Life in the Philippines isn't the same as back home. There are different rules, different struggles, and different ways to get by. But that doesn't make it any easier to stomach. Now, when I think about the women of Philippines, I don't see them just as victims or just as perpetrators. I see them as products of a system. Some are doing what they have to do to get by. Others are using their charm to make a living, to find someone who will take care of them, even if it's for a fleeting moment. But in the end, I was the one who was taken, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. It's a hard lesson to learn, but I suppose it's one that's shaped how I view relationships in general now. I'm more guarded, more skeptical of people's intentions, and I can't help but wonder when I meet someone new whether I'm being sold another story. But deep down, I still wish that I could find someone who sees me for who I am and not just what I can provide. In the end, my experience with Lon and the women I met in the Philippines left me questioning a lot about myself, about what love really means, and about the lengths people will go to survive in a world that doesn't always offer a fair chance. I can't forget them, nor do I think I'll ever fully understand them. If you're a man planning to travel to Southeast Asia in search of love or a meaningful connection, I want to offer you some advice based on my own experience. I've spent a fair amount of time in this part of the world, and while I've seen beautiful, real relationships form, I've also seen many men fall into traps, both emotional and financial. The allure of the exotic, the kindness of the locals, and the possibility of finding something different can be enticing, but it's important to approach these situations with caution and a healthy dose of realism. Here's what I've learned and what I think you should consider before diving in. As a man who has made many mistakes, as seen above, I would offer the following advice for those traveling to Southeast Asia looking for love. First, understand the culture and the situation. First and foremost, it's essential to understand the culture you're stepping into. Southeast Asia is not just a playground for Western tourists. It's a region with rich, complex histories and a range of different cultures, each with its own values, traditions, and norms. In many parts of Southeast Asia, the economic divide between locals and Westerners is significant. And this creates a dynamic where relationships, both romantic and transactional, can be influenced by money. Many people in these countries live with a very different set of expectations when it comes to relationships and what they want from a partner. In some cases, it's common for women to enter relationships with foreigners with the hope of improving their standard of living. This doesn't mean that every woman you meet is looking for your wallet, but you need to be aware that financial disparity can create imbalances in expectations. Understand that sometimes affection or interest can be a part of a transactional exchange, whether emotional or financial. Number 2, check your motives. Before you go, ask yourself why you're looking for love in Southeast Asia. Are you trying to escape the pressures of your home life, or are you genuinely seeking a connection with someone? Are you looking for something long-term, or just a temporary fling? Being honest with yourself is key. Many men who go to Southeast Asia end up disappointed because they were seeking something real, and instead found that the relationships they formed were based more on convenience or need than true emotional intimacy. It's easy to get swept up in the attention you'll receive from people who see you as a ticket to a better life. But that's not love, that's survival. If you're looking for genuine companionship, be clear about your intentions and make sure that your actions align with them. True connections happen when both people are equally invested and when neither person is using the other for personal gain. Number 3, beware of the bar girl trap. A lot of men go to Southeast Asia and end up meeting women working in bars or nightclubs. These women are often incredibly charming and will make you feel like the most important person in the world. But here's the thing. Many of these women are working to survive. They may see your attention as a way out of their current circumstances. And while this doesn't mean they aren't genuine, it's important to recognize that the relationship may not be as authentic as you hope. It's easy to confuse affection with transactional behavior. And once money is involved, the dynamic shifts. Buying drinks, offering financial support, or gifting material things can blur the lines of genuine affection. In many cases, this leads to hurt feelings down the road when you realize that the relationship wasn't built on a foundation of mutual love and respect. If you find yourself in a situation like this, it's vital to ask yourself what kind of relationship you want. Are you willing to offer financial support or provide for someone, even if it's not clear whether the affection you're receiving is sincere? Number 4, don't ignore red flags. When you're in a foreign country, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new relationship and overlook signs that things aren't as they seem. Red flags can come in many forms, such as sudden financial requests, reluctance to introduce you to family or friends, or inconsistent stories about their past. If something feels off, trust your gut. Many men find themselves caught in relationships where the woman's motives are unclear. And before long, they're pouring money into a situation that isn't what they thought it was. If you see behaviors that raise questions, take a step back and evaluate the situation objectively. Relationships that feel too good to be true often are. Number 5, be cautious with your finances. One of the biggest mistakes I see men make when traveling to Southeast Asia is becoming too financially involved in a relationship too quickly. It can start innocently, offering to buy a woman dinner or helping out with a small loan. But over time, the financial entanglements can escalate. In some cases, women will begin to ask for more money, or you may find yourself in a position where you feel obligated to provide financial support. While it's natural to want to help someone you care about, it's important to be clear about your boundaries. Financial dependence can create power imbalances in a relationship and lead to feelings of resentment or exploitation. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment when it comes to money. Be mindful of how much you're spending and how much is expected of you. Don't feel obligated to give more than you're comfortable with. Number 6, take your time. The rush to fall in love while traveling can be intoxicating. You're in a new place, surrounded by new people, and the excitement of a romantic connection can feel electrifying. But don't be in a rush to commit to someone or to define the relationship too quickly. Instead, take your time to get to know the person on a deeper level. Visit each other's houses, meet friends and family, and see how the relationship plays out in different situations. Love doesn't need to happen overnight. In fact, the more you rush into a relationship, the more likely it is that you'll miss important signs or overlook things that could later become major issues. Number 7, know when to walk away. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, things just don't work out. If the relationship isn't bringing you joy, if you feel manipulated or exploited, or if you simply realize that the connection isn't what you thought it was, know when to walk away. There's no shame in admitting that things didn't work out, but it's important to prioritize your well-being and mental health. Becoming emotionally entangled in a situation that isn't healthy will only lead to regret. It's better to leave before it becomes more complicated than to stay and make things worse. To conclude this narrative, based on my unique experience and the experience of others, I would say that traveling to Southeast Asia in search of love can be an enriching and rewarding experience. But it's important to approach it with awareness and caution. As for me, I've been trying to pick up the pieces of my broken life. Since I've returned home, I've tried to move on, but it's not easy. The experience left scars that go deeper than the physical ones from my fall. I've always been a bit of a loner, but this time loneliness feels like a permanent companion. I kept myself busy with work, picking up the pieces of my life, but it's hard to shake the memories of the Philippines. The faces, the smiles, the stories, each one's a reminder of my vulnerability of the way. I let myself believe in something that wasn't real. I guess that's what makes it worse. It wasn't just the money that I lost, but the trust. I had allowed myself to get swept up in a fantasy, in a version of love that didn't exist. People say time heals all wounds, but I'm not so sure. The anger I feel is mostly directed at myself now. I let my guard down. I let my loneliness guide me into making choices I otherwise would have never made. For all the lessons my parents taught me about life, work, and money, no one ever really talked about love. How do you protect yourself when it comes to something so intangible, so powerful, and yet so easily manipulated? I don't know if I'll ever be the same. There are days when I still find myself replaying every moment with Lon, asking myself where I went wrong, where the signs were that I ignored. Was I just looking for an escape? For something to fill the emptiness? Maybe. Maybe I was just desperate for affection, for connection. But at the end of the day, I know the truth. There was no love in Thailand, only survival. And I was just another fool, falling for it. It's hard not to wonder what would have happened if I had listened to Tom, but I guess that's part of the regret, the lesson I have to carry. You can't change the past. You can only move forward. So I'm trying to. Slowly. Maybe one day I'll trust again. But for now, I'm still figuring out what that even looks like. For now, I'm just another guy from Cincinnati, trying to put the pieces back together after being lost and broken by love in Thailand. What I learned, and the best advice I can give, is how important it is to understand the culture and economic context. Be clear about your own intentions and don't let the excitement cloud your judgment. Keep your expectations realistic, avoid financial entanglements, and take your time to build genuine connections. Most importantly, don't be afraid to walk away from a situation that doesn't feel right. By doing so, you'll increase your chances of finding a relationship that's both fulfilling and real, without the heartbreak or regret that can come from ignoring the signs. Thanks, guys, for listening. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.